Okay, a pleasant afternoon to everyone. We are the Soviet History Tourism team, and I am here to present with my comrades Nirab Pundasi and Bishwas Bata from Nepal, and I am Vivian Asaron from Philippines. We also have an Estonian comrades, but unfortunately was not able to join us for today's presentation. So the theme of our presentation for today is Soviet history-related tourism in northeastern Estonia for Western European tourism. So for our presentation, we will be presenting to you our fieldwork experience, our observation, the problem focus, the ideas we come up with, and then the resolutions that we have chosen. So first, we went to Narva, and we went to this Vaivara Blue Hills Museum. So the key experience that we had is, like, especially the experience knowing what happened to Narva during the World War and how destructive it was. And here in one of our pictures, we can show you the map of the destruction. And if you will go to Narva, you will not see the traces of these ashes and fires, but you will still feel how people were actually affected and how hostile or how it is hard for us as tourists to actually engage or talk to them. Next stop, we went to Krenholm factory, textile factory. This is one of the largest textile factory during the Russian Empire. And during the 19th century, there are like thousands or 10,000s of people who's working here. But currently, this is how this Krenholm factory looks like now. And during the experience, I've played a role as a visually impaired person. So just giving you a brief experience regarding this thing. Going to Krenholm, it's really like, it's totally hard for me to go around without any assistance and proper or organized tour from the end of the tourist workers. But if the experience were actually, if the tour were actually organized, there can be a very fruitful experience on the end of the physically impaired or physically challenged people. So we took the experience as a tourist because it was really hard for us the experience in Narva was really hard for us, like arriving there, the information available have a lot of discrepancies from online and from the information what we have confronted with when we arrived there. And there are like unregulated prices. And then not all information are written in English. And while traveling to Narva, there are also like confusion with train tickets and online booking. And when we check into the apartment, there are like hostile locals and landlords who only speak Russian. So it was hard for us to speak to them. We were just like fortunate that we have an Estonian friend who somehow can talk to them in Russian or can somehow talk in Russian. And people in Narva actually still barely talk in Estonian. So it was really a challenging experience for us. So traveling around the city, luckily we have met a friendly driver, but there is only one visible taxi in Narva. So we actually have booked one taxi from the place. And also, when we go back to our apartment, we also found the same taxi driver. So there are limitations in terms of transportation as well. So when we went to Vaivara Museum, the curator was friendly, but we wasn't able to have the full experience of the tour. And then when we went to Krenholm and walking tour, the starting point wasn't clear. The tour was not in English, but we were with a big group, though the experience during that time it's also raining, and I was not able to see the experience in Kremholm because I was in blindfold. Yeah, and then while returning back, as I said, we also have like encountered the same taxi driver.
So moving on to our observations. So you can see from our user journey that we didn't have too much of a positive experience. We had a lot of negative experiences. And one of the biggest problems for us was it was very difficult to find information in English. In terms of online as well, like Airbnb and all the accommodation site that we went to, all the information was either in Russian and sometimes in Estonian. And that was the same with like when we visited museums and places that we visited to. Even there, like the posters were, we went to the castle and then there was this poster about like Krillholm, but we didn't know what it meant, so we could not like get any information regarding this. So it was a problem if you do not speak Estonian or Russian, then you'll have like problem getting all the information. And also a lot of the information that we found online and different sources, there was difference in the information. So it was very hard for us to know like which information is correct, because there were different information and they were telling like different things. And so for example, like in the Visit Estonia site, you can see like here it says free of charge, but then when we went to the museum, it's like €5 for the tour. And also the starting point that we found in Google Maps is not actually the starting point of the tour, but we were only able to like find the starting point because the taxi driver that we went with helped us. And another thing that we found was it was very, it was like we had a very interesting experience in Narva. So there are these old ladies sitting in the window and just watching, like they are like CCTV cameras. So, and then one of the ladies, while we were waiting for our key for the apartment, she opened her window and like started shouting at us, saying like, "Why are you in front of my apartment? Get out or I'll call the police." So it was very interesting experience for us. But instead of focusing on this negative experiences, we decided to make like the positive experiences that we had as our problem focus, because there were like very few positive experiences and we wanted to expand on that. So one of the positive experiences we had was while we were talking with the curator of Vaivara Museum. She was very passionate and she shared us a lot of different experience like during the Soviet times. And it was a very interesting perspective that we could not like find online, what she went through, what she lived through. So that we found very fascinating. And similarly, like while we were doing the Kremholm tour, because the tour was either in Estonian or in Russian, we could not understand much, but like our Estonian friend was translating it to us. And one thing we found out was there were almost like 80% of the people worked in the Kremholm at some time, and we were very curious on like what they would see if these people still are alive, and we were curious like if we talk to them, what would they say, what would their experience, what were their experiences like. So we tried to focus on that, and then our selected focus was like to provide a complete and wholesome experience to tourists by utilizing the locals' experiences and perspective about life in Soviet times. And we also made this impact matrix, and from that impact matrix, this was something that would have high impact for tourism, but relatively like easier to do. And we tried to brainstorm a lot of ideas, and we also like made a matrix of like different things that we can do, but we came up with idea that will be talked about by Biswas.
So out of all the problems that we faced, and then out of all the ideas that we generated through our own group work and then suggestion of the common innovation team as well as our colleagues, we decided like So what made our team different was that we had to work on two solutions. First was to work on how to collect these informations and stories effectively, and after that, how to use these stories effectively. So the main solution that we come up for collecting stories was partnering with local universities to use their students for collecting these stories from their own localities. And then we went and talked with few people, like a city architect from Narva, and then a professor from Tallinn University, and they were really excited about this. And even like one good thing was when we were talking with a professor from Department of Anthropology in Tallinn University, he was so excited that he really liked the idea, and he said, like, we can immediately start this next semester. I have students, I can send them for fieldworks, and they'll get credits for their work, and we can start from next semester. Unfortunately, like Helene said at the start, today is the last day of this project, and we won't be here for longer. So if anyone from government university team or ministry wants to take this project further, I can get you in contact with Dr. Carlo from Tallinn University, and then start the fieldwork for collecting stories. And then, so this is one of the stories, example of stories that we can get. So Nirav talked about Clean Home and how there might be some interesting stories from Clean Home. And like you can see, she says, you can always recognize us from our loud voices. So this is something that people can relate to. Just going to Clean Home and seeing the things around there doesn't bring much joy. There's not much to connect with. There's no human emotion to connect with. But with stories like this, now we're adding a complexity layer to the places and the events. We're adding textures to which the visitors can come, relate to, and then like have a wholesome experience, and they can go back and talk about it or write about it. And in this way, like we can expand the whole tourism business. And then after collection of stories, how can we use it? And now again, we had a lot of ideas, and out of all, the idea that we selected was creating a trail with all these stories collected. We'll make a map of all these interesting stories, and then we'll include like where these stories are related to, and then people can go to these places and then use their apps, or maybe even scan the QR code in the buildings or the sites, and then get the stories from that particular location. And then on top of that, we can do a lot of things through technology. We can do AR games. We can do geotagging competitions. We can do even like for offline users, a non-technical solution can be printing out maps based upon these trails. And like Soviet trail in Narva, or maybe a radioactive trail in Sillamäe, or maybe a conservation tour in Valga. So these are, in Valga, we were very excited to find out like they were already doing some things like this to help the preservation of the older sites there. And other possible uses, like we can start a marketing campaign online using YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and this. And interestingly, we started creating Facebook pages, and without doing any kind of promotion at all, we already are getting some likes there. So it shows that there are interested people in these kind of things. And we have a YouTube channel up. We uploaded a few videos that we collected. And we can also use spaces like this in Tampsaare Park. We put the stories there, and to make it more interactive, we put QR codes where people can now scan the QR code and then get more information. So it's not just a picture there, they are getting now interaction with the stories too. And like one of our colleagues presented, we can use the stories in the museums too. So when people go to museums, we see stuff there like beds, or the arms that they use in the battle, or maybe a TV that they use in Soviet times, but that doesn't give you much information to connect with. But let's say there's a story about a person is telling you about like how he had to really bang hard the television to get some channels, or they had to like hack into something so they can watch channels that were forbidden. So now instantly there are something now we can connect to, and that makes it more interesting. So these are other uses. And do we still have time? We have some videos too, so yeah.
Ma arvan, et ma olin kusagil 10. klassis, kui me otsustasime sõpradega millegipärast 24. detsembril minna kirikusse, et mis see jõuluaeg siis ikkagi on ja mida seal kirikus tehakse. Ma ei mäleta enam, mida kirikus tehti. Tõenäoliselt oli seal jutlus ja oli lihtsalt üks ilus sündmus koos suure kuuse ja küünaldega. Aga mis selle loo eripäraseks tegi, et meie ühiskonnaõpetuse õpetaja kuidagi sai teada, et lastel on plaanis minna kirikusse. Ja siis ta läks kiriku juurde kusagile hekivarju ja vaatas ja märkis üles kõik, kes sellel õhtul kirikusse läksid.
I was in Soviet army and it was, I think, near the Moscow and we had one task. We were the surgeons and we also had to learn certain political things and one of the tasks was to conspect the books of the Lenin. There were some articles of Lenin, what Lenin said this and Lenin said that and we had a duty to conspect that. And at the beginning of year there was some list of the articles what we should make a conspect and we should make small summaries of those articles. And I was a little bit lazy and I was looking to the bookshelf and I found how to say some conspect of the one former soldier who had already conspected those things and I took the conspect, took the upper layer and I wrote my own name there.
So as you can see, like there are so many interesting stories that can be explored, and we think that these stories like mines or like valuable mines, like uranium mine from Sillamäe or the oil sales, and we can mine these stories and then like refine it and then use it to promote the Soviet legacy-related tourism in here in Estonia. Like by using these stories, we're creating empathy with people and helping them connect more with this and create a more wholesome and like more enjoyable experience. And that ends our presentation. Thank you.
Any hands?
Estonians are warming up little by lunch. Thank you very much for your very exciting presentation. It's interesting that I had exactly the same idea or thought when I visited Grönholm factory first time in my life this summer. There was a very popular summer musical that was performed in Grönholm a second year round, and I took on a second day I took this group tour with my friends, and we had a very young, very good guide, a girl who was from Narva, and she had done a very good work picking those local stories and telling those little stories on the tour. But it also came to my mind in the course of my tour that why don't they use, or they could actually perhaps at some occasions use those local people who have worked in Grönholm. And I asked her, why don't they use them? Because in some countries I know that they use unemployed people even to make tours, and they are very, very popular. But what she replied was that yes, they've had this idea, but it's very difficult for the people who have worked there to go back, and kind of for them it's a very sad story, because they have spent whole of their life and working life, the whole families in there, and it's kind of a very hard memory for them to see this a huge factory in ruins now, and nothing is going on there. So it's but it still could be an idea, because it would bring more local touch to this place, and as we often hear, it's actually the stories of local people that make experiences and encounters interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. And yeah, when we were researching about this, and we had a presumption that most of the stories that we'll get will be negative, but like we were very surprised, because most of the stories we got was very, very positive and very few negative stories. And when talking about Grönholm, the lady that we presented, and this was collected by City of Narva, they are like they were submitting proposal for Narva to become the European City of Culture for 2024. And she had a really good story about how Greenholm factory had this singing competition, and it was a very prestigious competition where like singing groups from all over, like Russia and even Estonia, will come and compete on this singing competition where a group of people come and sing in a choir. So there are like a lot of stories like that which can be used for that purpose. Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting of tackling this Soviet legacy that we have. I think from an Estonian point of view, we might want to sort of put it behind and tear down everything that was built during that time because it looks ugly to us, and then the stories sort of sometimes I think from an Estonian perspective, there is a feel that maybe let's move on and not look back. On the other hand, if we looked even at those two small video clips that they had generated, I think sort of an insight into what life was like during the Soviet times is really interesting. It's not only interesting for tourists. Today, those who are 20 years old are, they've no experience of living in that era, and I think they would be sort of tourists in the same sense that it would be as exotic for them as it is for a Western European tourist. And if any of you caught on to that idea of next semester using students to collect these videos, then the department that you were referring to is my home department of anthropology and visual ethnography. So I can also try to put you into contact with these people. And there are people who are studying visual ethnography and who are focusing on collecting stories and finding individuals. And I think that would be also a good future cooperation venue. Yes, there was a comment.
These two stories were really like funny stories, but should we also have not so family-friendly stories that are like real life horror stories?
Yeah, we were expecting those kind of stories in the start. We thought like those kind of stories will be the major ones that we'll get, but yeah, surprisingly we got positive stories. And when we prodded the gentleman whom we interviewed, like, do you have some like bad stories? And he was sort of offended at first. Again, very surprising, because he said like, we must move on from this stuff. We must like look forward. And the only negative story he told was like how a few soldiers from Estonia were stationed in Chernobyl when the world Chernobyl reactor thing happened, and like they had cancers and they had so many health problems, and that was the only negative stories we had. And like these are part of a very long interviews. Like one interview was more than around 12 minutes, and another was 5 minutes, and we'll be uploading both to YouTube if you want to watch it later.
Yeah, just one comment in the fellow European perspective. I'm from another country, from Italy, and for me it's very, very interesting and unique the perspective that here you can have on Soviet history, so very close to the Russian perspective, but also from European perspective, because now it's kind of part of European history, and it's really, really interesting to see from this, from inside, how it was to be in Soviet Union, how it was to be so close to the core of Soviet Union. So it's not other countries in Eastern Europe that maybe, or Central Europe, that were more like they had their independent identity. Here in Narva, it's very, very close. The Russian and Estonian identity is really mixed somehow, and it's just really, really interesting. Probably unique with the perspective that you can have here. So it can be really, I mean, if you can work on it, would be really useful.
And to add to that, we found so many stories, not just Narva, like all over Estonia. We found out about the city of Fallujah, which used to be one of the major transportation town. The trains from St. Petersburg and trains from Moscow came and merged there, and they went to Paris and other big European cities. And it used to be a very bustling town, and after the fall of Soviet Empire, now it's in ruins. And there were so many stories there, and I think one of the students, graduate students in Tallinn University, did a thesis on how preservation can be done on this. So again, yeah, there are so many interesting stories. We were struggling to decide on which stories to present here today. So yeah, a lot to explore, a lot to use.
Yeah, just one short comment as someone who comes from a post-communistic country as well. I'm from Serbia, and we also have this post-Yugoslavian legacy, but what is interesting for me is that even in Slovenia, which is a part of EU, or Macedonia, Serbia, Croatia, people have positive feelings towards this period, and we also like develop kind of a word which means it's Yugo nostalgia, and people are making a brand out of it. For example, they're having the whole fashion industry with the t-shirts which say Yugo chic, or some old shoes which were made in Yugoslavia, they're selling it now in some new hipster design to people and so on. So it's a different case, but it also shows that in some countries it can be positively used, I mean, based on some positive stories as well.
Yes, thank you. This was the last group. And now we have, yes, a round of applause.